The scrap metal recycling industry has always run on hustle, trust, and sharp instincts. This is the podcast for traders and operators who want to get sharper without losing their scrappy edge. I'm Stu Kagan, bringing you insights and stories from the people shaping the future of our industry. This is Born Scrappy. Hey Ames, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm awesome. Thanks, Amy. I'm excited to have you on, and this is a very interesting topic for me, and I think for a lot of other people. So, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Thank you for having me again. It's been a while, so it's nice. Feels like a nice little homecoming edition for me, and I'll do my absolute best to give you some
Look,
value.
absolutely. Look, you were super valuable last time, so we do like having you on the show. We love it. So it does make the ending a little bit different because we can't ask you the normal, where's your favorite place to visit and things, because we already know all of that. So I'll throw in something different a little bit later. So we'll catch you off guard there. Let's jump into the topic for today because it's masterclass season. So we're talking about adding some real value. This episode is called Demystifying Fast Markets. And what we're talking about here is making sure that the listeners and everybody in the industry understands how prices find you, where they come from, what moves these prices, what should we be looking out for, what should we be looking at, what should we not even care about. And when we were talking about this the other day, we couldn't think of anybody better. So no pressure at all. But I think this is a topic you like.
A topic very, very close to my heart. Firstly, I think it's great this episode is called Demystifying Fast Markets because that is exactly the business that we're in. We're into demystifying all the markets. So obviously very honoured to be helping in that process. And that is very much the name of the game of what we do as a price reporting agency. Obviously, I'm very pleased to have beaten out some of our competitors, naming no names, to be top of your list. But appreciate that very much. So yeah, of course, like let's dive straight into it.
Okay, so let's start with a simple one to warm you up. Most of our listeners and everybody in the industry are constantly checking prices, right? But often we don't even know how they're produced. So can you kind of walk us through step by step what happens before the price gets published?
Well, it's interesting that you mention how do the prices find us, and I would say that we're very much on the other side of finding those prices. You know, imagine a truffle hunter sniffing out information that's underground. That's us. And I did just compare myself to a pig, but in this instance, I'm quite happy with that parallel. So
I didn't say
obviously
it.
we operate under no, it's okay. I did the dirty work for you there, Stu. But no, we have a whole host of prices that are published on various frequencies, and they are either assessed or calculated on various bases. So obviously, without getting too into the weeds with it, we operate under a hierarchy of data whereby a series of trained pricing analysts will be responsible for a given market, and they will be responsible for sniffing out the tradable level of any commodity that is trading at a given time per our methodology. To publish a price that is accurate and reflective of the market within that window, whether that's monthly. I know we've talked a lot before about the monthly ferrous scrap trade in the US. It could be daily for some liquid markets. You know, our P1020 premium, for example, in the Midwest is a daily price, weekly, fortnightly. So we're operating under a lot of frequencies across a lot of markets. And essentially, we're aiming to speak to people on both the buy and the sell side of the deal. So traders, brokers, producers, consumers, and also looking from the upstream to the downstream as well. Although I would say that most of our information is sourced from upstream participants. But it's important not to negate those downstream original equipment manufacturers and other important conglomerates that buy into the pricing data and whose contractual levels we're informing with the work that we're doing. We operate under a hierarchy of data as well. Obviously, we're looking at transactions, but we're also looking at bids, offers, assessments of the market. And obviously, we'd start with a transaction would be the most sort of valuable or precise data point, I would say, based on the fact that it's an actual transaction, going down through that hierarchy to an assessment, which is more of an idea of general spot market activity.
Okay, so just to understand, we're talking about a hierarchy, which means at the top, we want the best evidence possible that this is a true, accurate price, and that would be a concluded transaction that you have the visibility of. You can now see that transaction, and you believe very strongly, based on the fact that it is a confirmed trade, that this is a price in one of the prices in the market. What comes below that? Is that like phone calls, hearsay? What's underneath that?
Well, the success of our business really relies on the relationships that our teams are able to build with participants in the market. So, we talk about a transaction obviously being the highest confidence data point, but there are hierarchies even within that stratum, the hierarchy of data. So, obviously we'll be looking at market share based on participants that have the most sway and percentage of market share. We're looking at how reliable a given source is. Obviously, we've got excellent relationships and we're very proud of those, and that's really what drives us. But there are hierarchies within hierarchies, going from a transaction that maybe has weighting assigned to it as well, which gives you an indication of, how much volume is being transacted at a certain level. Is it a one-off, very small spot deal? Is it a huge cargo that's being sold? So there's obviously, without getting into too much of the nitty gritty, there's hierarchy within that transaction data. And then we do listen to market participants. We've got relationships that we've built with regular sources that we canvass for information, depending on the frequency. But, we're very open with our methodologies, and we would welcome feedback. It's very plain to go onto the Fastmarkets website to read our methodologies. Anything that's published, there will be contact information for the relevant teams. So we get information that comes from our regular guys, as it were, and we're also open to taking market feedback at any point. There's no formal process to it. So, I would say the onus is on the Fastmarkets representative to really put the legwork in. But we certainly don't turn people away for giving us feedback and information.
Yeah. Okay, so don't worry, every single one of these questions will not have 10 questions about that question. This is just because I think this kind of sets the scene as the most important part. When you say you get a transaction, does somebody actually send you through a purchase order? How do you confirm a transaction?
It has been done. It's certainly by no means a prerequisite of talking to any of our reporters. People do send purchase orders. By and large, a lot of the operational aspect of the reporting is done on trust and relationships that are developed. And we obviously have, again, my new favorite word, the hierarchy within that, of people that we know are reliable, are active in the market, that we're talking to regularly. And which also forms a basis for comparison, right? So we're looking at things that are happening. If you've been entrenched in a market for a number of years, you're able to compare and contrast information that you've received previously from various sources. And there's integrity on both sides, right? So we obviously look to assess the integrity of the data, but we also have to act with that integrity. And a lot of that involves a level of discretion and making sure that people can trust that the information is treated impartially and that we are giving them the due respect of being confidential with their data.
I don't doubt the impartiality. I don't doubt that part. How do you know who to trust? How do you know somebody isn't just pushing the price up? It's like, oh, I got 325, well, they actually only got 315 per metric ton or per gross ton. And that was just because they want the price to go up, or the mills wanted to go down.
Well, that's sort of a basic function, isn't it? If you're looking at the participants on any side of a deal, people that would have a vested interest in the market moving one way or another. I'm sure that does happen, but we have very skilled reporters that are able to weigh that data against other points, and that are obviously able to weed out, something that looks slightly anomalous. So that's all part of the process, and we have very robust checks and balances for compliance purposes to make sure that there will be multiple numbers of eyes that have passed that information before it's published. It's all part of the process. It's a huge part of the process, actually. And obviously, we're aware that people have a vested interest in the markets moving one way or another, forms part of the training that people undertake when they join us.
Yeah. So lastly on this then, I guess I've only been in the US for just over a year now, and I constantly hear from the different metal recyclers that the market is manipulated, right? For them, it makes it hard because they're buying against it, which we'll delve into a little bit later. But what are they misunderstanding then? For everybody to just say, this month didn't go my way, so the market must have been manipulated by the mills or whatever it is. What are they missing?
I think the M word is one that we certainly don't use because it's got a very strong connotation. That's a criminal offence. So I certainly wouldn't be throwing. Let's moderate that language, Stu, to people that are, let's say, maybe trying to control the market in one way or the other. I can't. It's
You're right.
difficult.
You're right. I think manipulated is not by yourselves. I think what they mean is manipulated is if I'm the mill, I'm going to give you a different price. And if I give you 10 different prices, all substantially lower, that is a manipulation. Let's not use the M word, but it is somebody swaying the pricing to benefit them. Let's rather explain it like that. And what I'm asking is, how are they wrong?
I don't think it's that uncommon for people to maybe either give a weighted average of their deals or to select or cherry pick deals and again, I'm not talking about Fastmarkets per se. I'm talking in a general sense of an individual that was reporting into a PRA. Obviously, nobody's reporting into a PRA for the love of I'm sure there are many people that absolutely love talking to me, Stu, and there will be people on the other side of that fence that can't wait to see the back of me at the end of every month. If an individual outfit is, reporting into a PRA, it's very unlikely that they're doing it out of benevolence. There's a vested interest in reporting because in the best case scenario, one would hope that they're reporting in to keep prices accurate so that we can all be operating in a fair and equitable space. So I'm sure that there would be an argument to say that people could report either towards the higher end if they're trying to bolster the market, or to do the inverse if they have a vested interest in maybe buying at a lower level. But again, the checks and balances that we have in place mean that we're able to weight the volume of data that we receive, to compare and contrast data points, and to weed out anything that looks anomalous. And obviously, by virtue of what you've just said, we're very well trained to know that there will be participants that want the market to move in one way or the other. So we've got to be very mindful that we're calibrating a fair tradable level based on all of the information that we're receiving. But it's a really good question. And it's obviously something that just logically, even without the bounds of, forget Fastmarkets, it is just a human tendency to feather one's own nest, isn't there? So of course, that's something that one would look to weed out, as in data, as in life. So it's just one of the many fascinating elements to the job.
I just want to come in and say very openly that you are not here reporting on necessarily what Fastmarkets does. I'm asking you, as a PRA, how do these things happen, right? So when I'm saying people are trying to manipulate, also you threw the acronym PRA out, so I'm going to just explain. It's a price rating agency.
Reporting.
Price reporting agency, sorry. So that would be the likes of Fastmarkets. So that would be a PRA is where indexes are found, basically, right?
Yeah,
where you find your indices, price indices.
And if you'll permit me the joke, Stu, maybe I would come out with a price rating agency. I could go round giving, C- must try harder, or A+, excellent deal. So there you go. Maybe that's our next business endeavor. But yes, it's a price reporting agency. We have lots of facets to the business, but the primary function is the reporting of commodities at, a fair tradable level, an accurate tradable level at any given time, with very much an ancillary and auxiliary function, very much not part of the market, which I think sometimes people get a little bit twisted, to use the modern vernacular.
All right, let's see what moves the market. So let's start discussing less about Fastmarkets, more about the actual market itself. A metal recycler, I used to run many yards. I wake up in the morning, it's Monday morning, and the prices have completely changed. what are the things that you think immediately are causing that? What should I be watching? I always say to people, be careful of the weekends, right? Because in America, you come in and the rest of the world has already had Monday. You
Mm-hmm.
come in on Monday and that market is moved. So I used to always say, hedge everything, sell everything on a Friday. Make sure when you come in, you cover. So what are the things that they should be watching?
Well, I would say to start with, probably the news. Obviously, that's what you come to us for. But it's a very broad question, a very good question, because there are so many micro and macro factors that can be affecting the markets. Obviously, geopolitics is a huge thing that moves the needle. The situation with the US and Iran, for example, is having huge implications for lots of markets based on the impact that it's having on freight, concerns over oil. Although I think from a US perspective, there's only about sort of 2% of the US oil comes from the Middle East. It's more of a concern for other jurisdictions, but geopolitics, and that has a knock-on effect a lot of the time on currency. I know we've talked previously about how Turkey really moves the export needle for US ferrous exporters in particular. Looking at how the lira affects competitiveness and the ability for certain exporters to operate in certain currency pairings. It would probably be a shorter list as to say sort of what doesn't move the needle, but basic supply and demand fundamentals would be a baseline that I would say it's very important to know your customer. From my days in compliance, KYC was a big thing, knowing your customer, knowing their profile, and obviously how supply and demand fits into that. But there are so many facets that you could really look at. But I would say to anybody, really, somebody asked me recently, what's the first thing you do in the morning? I'm like, watch the news.
Oh, but come on. Okay, hold on, Ames. Watch the news. What are you watching? Which news? Like, it depends on who's putting out the news. That depends on what you hear.
Well, that's another great question. Actually, that's something that can be very US specific as well. I've noticed there's obviously I'm born and bred on the BBC, which is, supposedly unbiased. And then you come over to the US. I know I say that with a sort of
supposedly by who?
raised eyebrow.
They themselves.
And then you come to the US and the news here is a lot more bombastic. You've got CNN, you've got Fox. It seems a lot more divisive. The US is a sort of larger than life place, which is great in many ways. So the point I'm trying to make is that you should take your news from diverse sources, but I'd probably be most likely to start with Bloomberg, something along those lines, just to, if not impartial, to make sure that it drills down into kind of the real financial and market aspect of the news, rather than looking at sort of the partisan factors that can sometimes come along with reporting of really sensitive issues. Obviously we're living in very turbulent geopolitical times. I feel like that's a fairly relevant statement.
So let's understand one other thing here on pricing. How much of it is actually fundamentals and how much of it are we talking about psychology, especially in the domestic market? Like, there's sentiments that go out there which moves the market. What do you see playing more of a role?
I think if we were to take the US ferrous scrap market as an example, I would say that obviously the fundamentals underpin everything, but there's a huge psychological element. And I feel like you could really apply that to trading of any sort, because there's a lot of psychology that goes into the art of making a trade, or conversely not making a trade. Something that we've seen probably since the beginning of Trump's second term in office is the turbulence and the speed at which things have been rolled out in terms of tariffs, the way that things have been reneged upon, and the timelines of these decisions. It makes it very hard for people to actually operate within a space. So that has led to some sort of trading inertia in lots of instances. If we look at what happened in the copper markets last year, when we were sort of waiting and expecting a huge decision on tariffs on copper and copper scrap, and then things that never materialized, and all the while you've got the arbitrage between COMEX and LME just doing this, and people not really knowing how to navigate that space. I think psychology, just by virtue of what trading is, plays a huge part in that process. The fundamentals and the macro, they can inform you, and they do inform you on the shape of things, but really it's how you respond to that forms what actually happens, because it's that psychology that will determine the action that's taken based on the information that one has at any given time.
And let's understand the monthly pricing. So how much leverage, and as I'll say again, both of us are newish to the US or not from the US. How much leverage
Take me away.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have an accent, they have accents.
Exactly.
How much leverage do the mills actually have when they're shaping the monthly market prices, versus what people assume? People assume the steel mills here can make the price whatever they want and they can get away with it.
No, not so. So a lot of that has to do with market direction, right? Being a buyer's or a seller's market. So typically, if it's a market where demand is subdued, appetites aren't particularly good, obviously that would be classified as a buyer's market. So on the mill side, they may drag their feet on their market entrance, make dealers wait. To go back to your point about psychology, that can impact the psychology of the sellers, maybe destabilize their position if they're sort of being hung out to dry, for want of a better term, in anticipation of a buy offer from the mills. But it works in reverse if it's a hot market, if demand is good and outweighs supply. In that case, it's a seller's market, and mills would maybe want to get ahead of that with an earlier entrance into the monthly trade. So obviously there's a sense that with the consolidation that we've seen over a period of time, that there are mill groups within the US that have a lot of sway in the market, but they can't really negate the basic supply and demand fundamental. Well, they can to a degree, because a lot of them are integrated now with their own scrap yards, but there will still be times where they're required to come to the open spot market, and depending on the direction that market is taking, whether it's hot and it's taking off, or whether it's in the doldrums or on ice. I'm trying to think of like things that I've written over the years of like markets being on ice or being like a runaway train. That all informs part of the psychology and the form that these things can take. But I think it's very oversimplified to think that mills are purely in control of the situation. They definitely have a lot of power, but nobody is exempt from the Wild West that is the US ferrous scrap market.
All right, talk us through TBDs quickly. Give us for those that don't know what that is, just explain it very simply so that I can ask a question about that.
I feel like there was a time when nobody knew what a TBD was, and now it's like Pandora's box. Now we've opened the lid on the dreaded TBD. The lid will not go back on. And so,
well, internationally, no one knows what it is, and I don't know how it would fly in many other countries. So just talk us through TBDs.
Maybe we start a new trend and start rolling out TBDs to other
TBDs globally.
As long as I don't have to go and get involved in global TBDs, I don't mind. So it's an acronym that stands for to be determined, and essentially, because the ferrous scrap trade is broadly the first 10 days, give or take, of each month, where mills are securing their raw materials requirements to fulfill their orders for the rest of that month. While that negotiation is going on, it's very difficult and costly to down tools and have people stop shipping on their agreements. So typically mills will come out and say they'll be in a to be determined agreement with their suppliers, and they will agree to pay what is published by Fastmarkets AMM. For the most part, as we are the benchmark in that market. So it's just a handy tool that allows people to keep shipping. It means that nobody loses any margin by having to stop the flows of material. And it should, in theory, allow everybody to continue with their BAU with minimal disruption and pay a price to their suppliers that is to be determined based on the settlement date.
Okay, let me have my 2 cents. So this means that for a third of the month, metal recyclers in the US sell for an unknown price.
I would refute the simplification there, Stu. All it means is that while people are negotiating, they can keep material flowing and continue, because they're active in negotiations, right? So I could come to you and say, Stu, I will buy your heavy melt, but I want to buy it for $1. And then you would quite rightly cart me off to an asylum. Your characterization works on the proviso that nobody's actively negotiating, which is very much not the case. And, obviously I would come out on record and say that we are just reporting the numbers that participants that are actively involved in those negotiations tell us. And we crunch the numbers and then we come up with the price every month. But I wouldn't want that level of power. Uneasy sleeps the head that wears the crown, and I do not want a crown made of heavy melt. Too much responsibility.
Look, I did simplify it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
It's a very good, and obviously I'm not casting aspersions on you at all, because I think sometimes it's good to take the more simplified view of things that sometimes people genuinely hold, and maybe to demystify it, just to bring it back to the original thrust of what we were trying to do here today.
Oh, I don't go back on what I just said. I still believe what I said is absolutely 100% true. I mean, I negotiated some massive agreements when we were in South Africa. We used to do our monthly agreements, but we would go on the 25th of the previous month and we would start negotiating for what it would be from the first. And what would happen to us is, and we also had huge volumes, right? So we needed to constantly supply, but we had maybe 5 mils and we could have sent it to at any time. If on the first we didn't have an agreement with one of the mills, though that mill didn't get any supply, it might have had one on the 10th, but only once we had agreed on a price. So I am simplifying it as if there is a solution, like, hey, just go negotiate on the 25th. I'm not making it that simple, but I am saying that from an outsider looking in, it is pretty tough to wrap your head around. I understand why it's done, but I would struggle to be a supplier in this market.
Well, there's also other considerations that obviously go into it too, that obviously we're not party to in terms of the process, but the onus is on the consumer to check in with the suppliers to validate tonnage. I don't think for 1 minute, and I should clarify, people aren't just saying, well, just leave it up to the team at Fastmarkets AMM and they'll tell us when they're ready. No, there's obviously a lot more that goes into people determining their tonnage. You know, some people will come out with pricing that will have absolutely nothing to do with TBDs, but that's just a general function of the way that some markets have chosen to function for simplicity.
So let me understand on these monthly prices. If, for example, I am SA selling a huge amount of volume and I get $350, right? But then the smaller suppliers in the area are going to be getting $340 or $335, hopefully not $330, but in that region. What do you then show as the price for the month?
A lot of things would depend on, as we talked about previously, like the volume that's being sold. You know, if there's a participant that's a dealer that has a lion's share of that market and they've got an overwhelming price at X and they've got tonnage against it, you know, obviously logically that would, you know, probably formulate a bigger part of any average versus a much smaller participant that has, you know, a lot less to sell.
So is it an average? Is it a weighted average?
Obviously there's, you know, I can't speak to the exact, because it will vary as well based on the information that is received on each month. So I couldn't speak for Fastmarkets per se on this, but there's no hard and fast rule that says, you know, this is a weighted average, because these are all assessments that will use editorial judgment in their formulation versus an index, for example, that would be calculated using a formula and that would, you know, spit out a weighted figure based on the inputs. You know, there's a lot that goes into it in terms of, you know, we've talked about data hierarchy, we've talked about trust. Trust is huge in any kind of business, relationships that you've built with people. It's why I'm always very confident for our place in the market in an age of AI, because there will be a lot of things that a computer can't replicate, that a relationship that's been, you know, built over time will be able to achieve.
But Amy, I'm going to double click on here because I'm not sure if it is about the relationship. And I don't have an answer, right? I don't know what the answer should be. Like if SA supplies 75% of the material and the 25% of the value of the leftover comes from 25 suppliers, I don't know what price you should be showing. But where it gets super, super tricky is when metal recyclers are back to backing their purchases with their sales against the Fastmarket prices. So Fastmarket comes out at 350 because SA was at 350, but I'm buying against the 350 because that's the price Fastmarket put out. That's a really tough situation. Now, this is not a go at Fastmarkets. I understand there's no solution. I understand there's nothing that's perfect, because if you put out the lowest price, well, that doesn't make any sense either. So, and you could put an average, but then is it a weighted average? Like, how do you take that into consideration? How do you think, what do you think about when I say that?
I feel like what I think about when I say that is, going to sound a little bit harsh, but referring to my previous point of us being an auxiliary function of the market, that's very much not our concern. That's when the person making the deal needs to know what, and again, I'm not talking about you, Stu, per se, but when one is making a deal, that's the consideration that needs to be factored into negotiations, as we've got absolutely no control over that, or how people are utilizing those numbers. Obviously, we're well aware that people buy and sell off of those numbers, and if an individual gets picked off in their negotiation with the consumer and comes in below the level that we're reporting, that's again a function that we can't control. In as much as we can't control the fact that somebody may be squeezed on one or other side of the deal based on where the market is set and what their buyer and seller agreements look like. So I feel like, I don't want to seem harsh or uncaring, but while I can sympathise on a personal level, that's not something that I can control, nor should anybody in our line of work be trying to control. It's accuracy is the name of our game. And once we know that we have published a number in any given commodity market that is a fair tradable level at any given time, that's where our involvement in that process stops. Obviously, we will always take feedback based on people that think that the market is. We get the word unfair a lot, and that's really not. We'll take feedback if there's something that has been published that maybe was the wrong decision. We'll take full accountability, but we're chasing that accuracy, and that's where our involvement in that process stops. So the onus is on the trader or whatever participant that's using those numbers to make sure that they're on the right side of things.
I'm currently hearing every person that's ever said this to me saying the same thing, right? And let me tell you what they say. They're saying that it would be easier if you actually told them how you got to the price. Now, I'm not saying you can't do this. Remember, we're just having a conversation. It's not about Fastmarkets. It's not about me. It's not about... How do they have visibility of, well, the number we put out is based on a weighted average, or the number we put out is based on the highest price and we've taken off $5 because we realize not everybody can. How do they have access to that? Because when you are buying material, it's really hard to go back to your supplier and say, this month didn't go my way. I'm getting lower than what Fastmarkets is reporting, so therefore I need to change your price. They don't really accept that. That's not going to go down well, and you're going to lose that account very quickly. So talk me through the ability for them to get some form of visibility of how the price is calculated.
I feel like our methodology is very clear and it's published on our website. It's openly available. Anybody that's participating, or even non-subscribers, people will be potentially doing business with people that don't subscribe to Fastmarkets. So our methodologies are all publicly available, and they will give you the parameters of the material specifications, delivery window, currency, frequency of publication, and they will give you all of the information that informs the parameters for data that we're able to take. And then the individual that will be reporting on or analysing that market will know the market very well, the participants' market share, fundamentals that move that market, and taking into account data that's received in line with that methodological specification. And knowledge of the market will inform the calibration of the price. And we're very transparent, we're very open to feedback, and we will share with anybody that wants to talk to us, in as much as it doesn't affect the confidentiality of data that we receive. And it probably sounds a little bit like I'm sort of saying, well, tough. But I do think there's a lot of information that's publicly available, and we are very open. Unlike some of our competitors, we give the market free access to our reporting staff. So we will work with people as much as possible, but in reality, there's nothing more that we can do on that side of things. I certainly know that it's happened where people report or they agree to something that comes in under, more than likely than over, our published numbers. But, again, that's not a conversation that we're able to have. That's obviously between the dealer and their buyer, or vice versa. So that's not something that we can take a position on, and nor should we for impartiality purposes.
I mean, I can't imagine the mills make it any easier, because if I'm negotiating and I've got a lower price than is being reflected in Fastmarkets, which is accurate, I just didn't get a great price. And I go to the mill's going to say, no, Fastmarkets prices are all wrong. I promise you're getting the highest price in the market. That's what they're going to tell me, because they don't want to tell me that they gave $15 extra to somebody else. They're going to tell me that I'm on the same page as everybody. So that can't help you either. But I just want to ask you methodology. When you say methodology, you're not talking about we used an average of 10 suppliers into 3 mills. You're not saying that. You're saying hierarchy of information and things like that. Is that right?
Yeah, so it will give you the parameters of the assessment or index, depending on which. In this case, we're obviously talking more heavily about the US ferrous scrap market, so they would be assessments. So it will give you the parameters, so people will know what information is acceptable in the formulation of those prices. And obviously, they will understand the category and the caliber of information that goes in to form those assessments. But I think it's a good thing that we're assessing rather than calculating these markets, because it really does involve a lot of specialist knowledge and being able to kind of crunch those numbers and understand how that market functions. Whereas I think, naming no names, there will be maybe outfits that are focused purely on index calculations that I think actually sometimes do more harm than good, because they don't take into account certain functions of the markets, and they spit out a calculated number, which in some instances can be more harmful, I think, than having someone analysing the market that understands its functions and is able to use their judgment to produce an accurate number that represents that market at any given time.
Look, I think a lot of credit to you guys for making your people available, right? I don't think anybody else does that. So that's great, but I would hate to be one of them. Sometimes they must receive some very tough calls where it's like, I need to know how you got to this, because I am nowhere near this. Have you ever been on the receiving end of that call?
I've lost count. I'm fully, just to keep it topical to metals, I'm like fully galvanized. I'm like galvanizer's dross at this point. Like, I've been through this mill so many times. Like, it's sort of like a rite of passage. No, of course. And it's not for the faint-hearted in terms of a job, particularly not when you're operating or managing such a huge benchmark. But I would say that the fact that people are so vocal and they care so much about those numbers actually is a point of pride, because it means that you're spending your days investing in a career that really matters to people. There are people that are settling, billions of dollars against some of these contracts that Fastmarkets prices, and it's it's an important function. So I think, there's good days and bad days, but I think the good outweighs the bad. If you're looking for something that has purpose and that is important.
It's got purpose.
It's definitely got purpose.
I bet you never get a phone call that says, wow, well done, guys. You got that price spot on.
It does happen, but it's so funny because you'll know this. So my official tenure with Scrap is nearly up. So I accepted, I'm going to head up another team within Fastmarkets, and I'm looking forward to some new challenges. But it was only after I'd sort of announced that I was hanging up my hat that people actually came to me with some really lovely compliments, which was really nice. But I thought, I've been in this market for nearly 5 years now, and I've been leading the team for 3. And I thought, wow, there have been times throughout my tenure that a kind word wouldn't have gone amiss. Now and again. But I suppose at least I can bookend my current foray into the scrap markets with some positive words.
Yeah, that's awesome. When you look at kind of into the future, 5, 10, I always say, I was doing a podcast just this weekend on stage in Atlantic City, and I asked the guest, what does he think the next 10 years look like? And he literally gave me examples of things that are currently out there. So I want to say to you, what does the next 5 to 10 years look like? It could be in 1 year. Like there's a lot of structural changes that are happening. What's going to disrupt scrap prices and how they're discovered, how they're reported on, etc.?
That's a really good question. There's a really obvious one to this, isn't there? AI. There are a lot of market participants at mill level or even on the dealer side that are more reliant on AI-based applications across a lot of their operations now. So we're seeing with inventory management, there's software that can really nimbly, pick your furnace melt based on inventory on the ground, best yield, cost curve, all that good stuff. So since we're seeing a lot of that happening at the participant side, I know that there's some suggestions to say that actually who's to say that a human is needed to crunch this data and to assess these prices. Even though I don't think that I'm going to be out of a job tomorrow, I would say that there are a lot of things within the data intelligence space that are relying increasingly on artificial intelligence. Even though I don't think it's going to be a substitution, I do think that that's a huge disruptor in the space. And we're already seeing the ways in which AI can make the process more nimble. Whether it comes to the pricing, I don't know, but certainly when it comes to the formulation and the ability to sort through data, because what we do at Fastmarkets, there are lots of facets to it. I can definitely see the way that AI is streamlining and disrupting the space to positive effect. Do I think it's going to put us out of a job? No. But I do think that it's going to help us to be more nimble, and I think that can only be a good thing.
Okay, so we're out of time, and usually I would ask you my lightning questions, favorite book, favorite movie, place to visit, etc. But we've already done that. So we know everything there is to know about Amy Jane Hinton. So let's quickly find out one or two other things. Tell us one thing that we don't know about you.
One thing that you don't know about me. Well, actually, something since I've been living in the US, it's increased my interest in football. And I'm not talking about American football. So obviously this is a World Cup year, and it's really exciting because the World Cup is being hosted across North America. So the US, Canada and Mexico are all getting their fair share of matches. So I'm really looking forward to the World Cup this year, and I'm a supporter of Chelsea Football Club. So there you go. I don't think anyone knows that about me. But my love of the beautiful game, which I feel like having been born in 1989 and growing up in the kind of golden era of sort of David Beckham and the likes, at the time I didn't have a full appreciation for like my father's indoctrination of me when it came to watching football as a child. But now that I live in the US, where people say football for something that is essentially rugby with walkie-talkies, I feel a lot more strongly about actual football and my roots. There you go.
You mean where you actually use your foot?
Yes,
football.
exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Instead of
so
like a lunatic.
I used to like you, but I am not a fan of Chelsea. I am a Liverpool fan, and
it could be worse.
I flew to exactly, yeah, your rivals. I flew to Anfield once to go watch Manchester United versus Liverpool, and I watched David Beckham play, and those were very good days, great years. England probably won't even make the World Cup, right?
Don't. I've already.
And I don't mean the knockout stages.
No, what was it? I was listening to Football's Coming Home over the weekend. It popped onto my playlist, and I started to get all misty-eyed. And I was just thinking about, I would really love. Nothing would give me greater pleasure than if we were to win the World Cup in
America.
In America, that would.
All right, we're boring people now. They like throwing the ball in their football. So here's something different. Teach me something, anything.
Okay, right. Here's some. So I'm thinking of maybe going back to school to get my MBA. So top tip for test conditions, which are always very useful. If you have a test in front of you with X amount of questions, before you even put pen to paper, pro tip, read through every single question on that paper. Read through slowly, carefully, and then go back to question number one and start answering. Because whilst you've read that information and you've gone back to the top of the paper to start putting your answers down, your brain is already subconsciously thinking about the answers to the remainder of those questions. And an additional point, confidence is key. Apparently studies show that based on confidence levels, a man will go into a test with less preparation and do better than a woman because a woman worries more about her performance. So there you go, a couple of words
Makes
to the
a
wise.
lot of, it's
Read
probably the
through,
only reason.
and confidence is key. So there you go. If you're on a sticky wicket, Stu, hopefully that's equipped you with some tools to succeed.
I've never lacked confidence going into exam. I've
No,
got
I
to be
was
honest.
going to
But
say.
I always thought read the questions before. I was always told read all the questions. I always thought it was because read them and then start with the easy ones. Literally, that's what I always thought it was.
Well, there you go. If you could knock those out nice and quickly and get them on the board,
Your
and then go back,
subconscious is working on the tough ones. There we go.
Exactly.
Subconscious working on the tough ones. Amy, this was lots of fun. Thanks so much for joining us on Born Scrappy again.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Stu.
That's it for this episode of Born Scrappy. If you have any questions, stories, or topics you want us to dig into, send them my way. Until then, keep it scrappy.